Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, October 25th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary. A quick note, you heard me earlier in the summer talk about, obviously it's not the summer anymore, but you heard me talking about the commentary roast of Natan Sharansky on November 17th. I am both proud and slightly upset in some ways to report that we are almost entirely sold out at the roast. We have a turnout the likes of which, as Donald Trump would say, no one has ever seen before. People are saying that it will be the most populated roast in commentary history. And we are down now to a waiting list. If you really meant to try to come and you delayed till now, you can email us at roast@commentary.org to be put on the waiting list. We don't really have anything left other than waiting list slots. But I did want to mention this to our listeners who may have thought that they had time and the last time has run out. But I thank everybody who has decided to be a patron, a supporter of the roast. It is our major fundraiser of the year. It is proving to be will be a very important element of our success this year. And I think we're all very flattered by the fact that it just gains in popularity year after year after year. So a podcast, roast@commentary.org if you want to get on that waiting list. And at that roast, if you attend, you will meet my fellow panelists, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Democratic panic. I don't think you can understate the fact that there is Democratic panic. I'm going to read to you from the description of the New York Times Siena national poll in the New York Times. Its final national poll. I don't know why it's the final poll, since there are 11 days left to the election, but it's a national poll. They'll probably be doing battleground state polls, I imagine, up until election day. But this is the final national poll, a dead heat, 48-48. Last national poll by the Times and Siena had Harris up by 3. This is the second paragraph of Adam Nagurney and Ruth Igelnick's piece. The result, coming less than 2 weeks before Election Day, and as millions of Americans have already voted, is not encouraging for Ms. Harris. In recent elections, Democrats have had an edge in the popular vote, even when they have lost the Electoral College and thus the White House. They have been looking to Ms. Harris to build a strong national lead as a sign that she would do well in such critical swing states as Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Ms. Harris and Mr. Trump remain effectively tied even after 3 of the most tumultuous months in American political history, a high-profile debate, 2 attempts on Mr. Trump's life, dozens of rallies across 7 battlefield states, and hundreds of millions spent on advertisements have seemingly done little to change the trajectory of the race. Now, that paragraph, that last sentence, is undone by the facts of this poll, which show not that the trajectory of the race has been unchanged, but rather that it has changed and shifted in Trump's favor. He has gained 3 points on her in the poll. They are now tied in a national poll,
right,
of Times Siena. So articles in Axios, elsewhere, what we are hearing is Democratic liberal panic. And for the first time, I don't believe in political panic. I think it's a stupid way of relating to politics. Everything can change in an afternoon. But there's just no arguing with the fact that the data are shifting in Trump's direction, and Democrats can no longer put their heads in the sand and pretend that it's not happening.
It's just not one poll, right?
That's why. Exactly.
It's all the polls show a direction toward Trump, whether it's the Wall Street Journal poll the other day, which showed him ahead and probably his best poll ever in 9 years, or whether it was the CNBC poll. Name your poll, and you see Trump closing in the final weeks of the election. And that is not a good sign for the Harris campaign. And it's also, I think, speaks to kind of the muddle, semi-phoniness of her strategy. We had Joy, then we had Kamala had a plan for the housing and for kids. Then we had Trump is too old. Now Trump is the oldest presidential candidate ever. Then we had Trump is hiding. Why won't Trump release his medical records? I'm Kamala Harris and I just went to the doctor. And now we have Trump is Hitler. Hitler's here. Hitler's going on Joe Rogan today, Friday, October 25th. And as the Wall Street Journal editorial page points out this morning, apparently Democratic Senate candidates in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are more than happy to feature Hitler in their ads in the final days of the campaign, because rather than mentioning Biden or Harris, they're showing how they worked with Trump during his first administration. And then just finally, it might just be me. Now, I'm not known to be, plugged in to the culture. But when I look at Harris crisscrossing the country with Bruce Springsteen and Beyonce and the cast of The West Wing, which I believe has been off the air for almost 20 years, I get the sense that her surrogates are kind of these celebrity, if they're not has-beens, they're like part of the architecture that people are used to them. It's not really exciting. And I think that could be said of the entire Harris campaign.
Somebody pointed out to me yesterday, very interestingly, that when Bill Clinton used Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow as his campaign theme song in 1992, Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow was 14 years old.
Right.
Okay. Obama was on stage with Eminem
Yes.
and did Lose Yourself.
Right.
Lose Yourself is 22 years old.
Yeah, 22 years.
So that's a very telling thing. Now, she had Taylor Swift say she's for her.
Right.
Right. So if you're going celebrity, she got the biggest celebrity to say that she was going for her. But Taylor Swift is not performing with her. Beyonce apparently is going to perform with her. But if we're getting down to this kind of granularity in which the question now is, boy, Trump is so uncool. He only has, Lee Greenwood and some country music stars and Zachary Levi from Chuck and
but he has the whole new bro media subculture.
And this is just like the argument you've made correctly many times, John, about one Achilles heel for Democrats is when you control all the media, you never have to deal or even know that there's an alternative around. And that is true. I think this election will show that's true of popular culture as well. The Democrats control most of the major cultural institutions, Hollywood, whatnot, and they are her candidacy seems completely unaware of the Bro podcast, and not just the Bro podcast, but a whole subculture of podcasts, some of which Donald Trump has very successfully appeared on as a candidate. And there's a lot of deja vu here, right? Like there's Beyonce and Springsteen did the same thing for Hitler in 2016 while he was going to wrestling matches, and people were like, what is he doing? I said Hitler. Hillary.
For Hitler.
Hillary.
Hitler's on my mind. Oh my God, the messaging is.
I was going to say, well, Hitler did the Dave Ramsey podcast to get out of debt yesterday.
Hillary went on TV last night and talked about him having a Hitler-esque rally at Madison Square Garden.
Oh my God!
Sunday. So sorry, it is on the break.
Yeah, that was amazing because, as I recall, I believe Democrats had a Hitler-like rally convention at Madison Square Garden.
I know, it's shocking.
Back in 1992, I think there was a Hitler rally in Madison Square Garden where the Knicks are having Hitler and Billy Joel.
Billy Joel performed.
I was just there 150 times evoking Hitler. And by the way, not to go too deep into this, but it's not even the same Madison Square Garden. Madison Square Garden has moved twice since the Madison Square Garden arena that had a Bund rally at it in 1939, and in 1943 there was a Jewish rally in support of World War II in the same space. So, you know what? Go stuff it.
There's
Hillary
another
Clinton. Like, can I just take a moment then to commend to your attention a review by our very own Christine Rosen of Hillary Clinton's new book in the November issue of Commentary, available to you now at commentary.org, which really does raise the question, why is Hillary Clinton published her 78th autobiography? Why is she doing this to us? Why is she on TV? Why are people having her? Why would Kamala Harris want her as a surrogate? What the hell is going on? This is not helpful.
There's another aspect to this, I think. I mean, that relates to this, which is, I think if you're an American who is financially struggling, not happy with the economy, not terribly trusting in an assortment of American institutions, celebrity culture itself doesn't dazzle you at the moment the way it once did. I think part of the populist pushback on the establishment also has to do with certainly the media establishment, but not just the news media. This is an age of, self-made, nobody hit singles, and things like, just breakout stars out of nowhere.
People making $100 million unboxing toys on YouTube.
Yeah, so there's something even slightly passé about the idea that Democrats seem to have about superstardom at the moment.
But I think the Bro podcast thing is an interesting place to go for a minute, because Trump is going on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, when he moved to Spotify, in the largest media deal of the decade, it was said of Joe Rogan that his podcasts got 190 million downloads a month. So Hillary's going on Colbert, who gets 2 million people a night, and she's going on with Hallie Jackson and gets they got 3 million people to watch the town hall. God knows how many people are going to listen to Trump on Rogan. Now, it's, by the way, not without risk that he is going on Rogan. Rogan is a loose cannon and will ask anything and do anything, is afraid of nothing. And but of course, this is Trump's element, is talking in this way to an audience kind of like that. And that's the media get of that's the version of going on The View when you're George W. Bush in 1999, is going on Joe Rogan. There was talk that Kamala should go on Joe Rogan, that she had been invited to go on Joe Rogan. She is not going on Joe Rogan. Maybe she should go on Joe Rogan.
The only new media
campaign work. Yeah, go ahead.
Franchise she did was the
Charlemagne the God.
Well, Charlemagne the God, but even he's traditional radio.
Right.
It's the Call Me Dad, Call Your Daddy.
Yes, Call Me Daddy. Yeah, Alex Cooper.
Alex Cooper. Right. That's the only thing she did.
Yeah,
and it was a flop. I mean, it was a flop. It was. It seemed completely scripted. I think actually Cooper lost some credibility with her own audience. And then Kamala behaved the same way she does in any interview, which is slightly offended at having to be there in the first place. It's kind of her demeanor usually. It's like, why am I even here?
Thank you. I have been wondering,
why are you even asking me these questions?
That's it.
But she doesn't like to be asked questions because she doesn't want to answer any questions. I think there was in the Axios report today.
This is the Democratic Panic report.
Talking about Democratic Panic, there was a quote from an advisor saying, or a businessman, it was a former Obama person who's now on Wall Street, saying, I spend tens of thousands of dollars on lobbyists and analysts, and none of them can tell me what she actually believes. And that's
I want to make right. So my dear old friend Bill Kristol, on some podcast he does, or something he did for the Bulwark,
his conversations,
excuse me, this is one of the oldest things in the world of pundit video, so that's not fair. Bill Kristol's conversation with Ron Brownstein, and he and Ron Brownstein had the following exchange. Bill said, a Democrat said to me, Harris is winning the candidate war and the campaign war. Trump's winning the advertising war. Ron Brownstein, longtime LA Times journalist, columnist, totally, says Ron. That ad campaign is motoring forward. If they beat her, that will be the principal reason why. Now, in September, Harris spent $270 million on advertising. Trump spent $78 million on advertising. She outspent him 4-1. So the issue is not that he's winning the ad war. The issue is that she's losing the ad war.
Well, and the messaging,
if you have a product, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Just quickly, his messages actually make a point. He says, she's for they, them, not for you. Her ads are all over the place. If you actually, I've watched a lot of them. You still don't know what she stands for.
Right. So saying that she's winning the candidate war and the campaign war is almost an oxymoron, because she raised $1 billion. She has spent a third of it in 1 month on advertising. I don't know what she spent in October. I assume that pattern has continued.
Well, remember Biden was spending millions for the past 6 months on ads.
Right. So the ads aren't the issue. She's the issue. She doesn't have anything to say, or what she's saying is displeasing, or what he is highlighting as part of her record is digging into her, and she is not digging into him. In fact, it may well be that the ad blitz that she has done has played some small role in limiting her rise or freezing her in place, and has played some small role in Trump's inching up as he has inched up. So that's not winning a campaign war, that is losing the campaign.
But John, she has a to-do list. She put it out just yesterday, October 24th, 6:27 p.m. Kamala Harris posts on Twitter, Trump has an enemies list. I have a to-do list. And then she attaches the to-do list. Anyone can read it. My favorite part of the to-do list is it's labeled Kamala Harris's to-do list in this kind of font that is like if you told the computer to make a very well done cursive letter. So almost like Comic Sans, except it's kind of very fine point calligraphy. It's not her handwriting, but it is her to-do list. And her to-do list includes things like, we've heard, cut the taxes for more than 100 million Americans. Not sure what that refers to. Strengthen Medicare and protect Social Security. Okay. Her housing plan is in there. The bipartisan border security bill is in there. Restore reproductive freedom is there. Legalize recreational marijuana. And a few other things that she's talked about on the campaign trail, like giving families a $6,000 tax credit for the first year of their child's life, the price gouging ban. And then the final bullet box is, and more. And I don't know. I don't know what's in the and more category.
It's
and
a
also,
threat, not a promise.
If you make a to-do list, when can you check off and more? Right? Doesn't that defeat the purpose of a to-do list is to say and more?
That is progressivism writ large. True progressivism will never
finish the to-do list.
And more. Yeah.
So, more is an item on the list.
Yeah. Exactly.
More what?
Okay. So I think what is interesting about the last 2 or 3 days, we did do that ruminative podcast a couple of days ago about whether or not we were sounding triumphalist about Trump or not, and what that might mean given the distasteful qualities of Trump. But what all this indicates is that Harris is the subject of the campaign, not Trump. And that we're not talking about Trump, we're talking about Harris. And the political class is talking about Harris, it's not talking about Trump. And she spent 3 days this week, or the establishment around her spent 3 days this week trying to shift the subject back to Trump is Hitler, generals hate Trump, he partied with Jeffrey Epstein, and all of that. And I don't really know because all of that needs to be registered next week when they do polling next week, but it's not working. She needed him to be the focus of the campaign, to remind people of what they didn't like about him so she could win. And the opposite has happened to her detriment.
Because the voters care more about what's actually happening to them. And she's not speaking to that. You can call Trump Hitler all you want, but if your grocery bill remains high, if you're worried about the future of the country, if you would like to buy a house but can't afford to, all of her promises seem empty because she doesn't back them up with actual real policy outlines. I mean, throwing money at the problem is what a lot of Americans, I think, feel has gotten them into the situation we're in now. During COVID, this was the administration that just printed money and claimed, and they're still doing it. Just this week, Biden's once again saying, I'm going to forgive more student loans, even though this has been declared illegal. So I think that's where, if you're calling someone Hitler, that's all well and good. But what does that mean for me, the voter, sitting here looking at my family's budget and going, I can't afford to live the way I could 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago?
And I also think so much of this has to do with the fact that she, as a person, has come into sharper focus than she was when she first appeared in the joyful convention and all that. And, part of this, I think, has to do with the fact that once it became clear in public that Joe Biden wasn't what everyone was pretending that he was, and that he was swapped out, the voting public became, I think, much more skeptical, because they're like, wow, they were going to foist this guy on us. And so then they could take a more skeptical look at someone like Harris and say, well, it's just, if they were gonna leave us with him, they're not beyond leaving. She really may be as empty as she's starting to seem. They're not above that.
I think that we can all acknowledge that the first week or two of the Harris presidency, we all thought,
Candidacy.
well, she's gonna the Harris candidacy. I'm sorry, we all
Could
thought,
be both,
well,
for all we know.
it's over. She's gonna win. They did what they had to do.
Well, John, you thought
people
that.
love her.
I
No,
didn't. I never
hold on.
thought that.
Okay, you never thought that because you were like,
that.
he's too much of an empty. I'm saying that the sense that, hey, wait a minute, last week you said you were feeling 2022 vibes.
She could still win. I'm just saying I
can still win.
have the documentary evidence of when she came out as the nominee, and you telling me it's over, she's winning. It's done.
No, okay, so I'll put it on myself instead of us, but I will say that there was a general sense, okay, like she swapped it out. She's an empty suit and all of that, but like, the enthusiasm is crazy. The money is crazy. Democrats who were falling away from Biden are all just going to simply go back to her. And that all she had to do was run a competent campaign to win. There were questions about whether she could run a competent campaign. We all heard during the course of the Biden presidency that he had no confidence in her, that they thought she was bad. Her approval rating numbers were bad. She did a bad job when they gave her things to do. Biden didn't leave, and other people weren't advising him that he should leave, like Nancy Pelosi, because they didn't think that Harris was up to the job. But it looked for a while like she was at least up for the candidacy. And the story of the last 2 months, and particularly the last 2 weeks, is that she's not up for this. Doesn't mean she's not going to win, because Trump remains an extraordinarily controversial, divisive, and relatively unpopular figure. And people who have memories, a lot of them do remember the Trump years unhappily, not happily. So she can win.
I would just say
the story is her failure.
Yes, and also some other factors. I was struck in the Times Siena poll today that shows a tied race head to head, and then at one point Trump lead with the other candidates. But here in this poll as well, the issues continue to favor Trump. And so on the economy
except abortion, right?
Except abortion, right? But economy, inflation, Harris had narrowed Trump's double-digit lead from earlier in the year, but he's still ahead. Very importantly, on immigration, he continues to have a double-digit lead. And Harris has never been able to answer the immigration issue with any substance or persuasiveness. Even in interviews with Telemundo or Univision this week, she was talking about how we did the right thing throughout the presidency, up to and including the executive measures which were imposed earlier this summer and which do seem to have contributed to a decline in illegal border crossings, just as those of us who had been supporting them from the beginning would suggest. She had this major issue. She has had nothing to say. The only issue on which she has had a sustained lead is abortion. And I think that's why she's decided on this kind of bizarre strategy of beginning the final 10 days of the campaign in Texas, a state no one thinks she's going to win, but she wants to highlight the Texas abortion restrictions, which, by the way, had been in place since September of 2022 and don't seem to have really affected the Republican Party's hold on Texas since. But nonetheless, that's what she's doing. She's going to spend these final 10 days on abortion, and Trump is Hitler.
Can I add something about the immigration debate? Because there was one, was it either during her debate with Trump or when she was being interviewed? She said, "Oh, of course we tried to do stuff. The administration's been doing all these things and we're not getting credit for it. It's the Republicans who blocked it." But what's been totally memory hold is that remember that one of the first things they tried to do with Build Back Better, it included an amnesty program for people who'd come over illegally, which was not going to work. I mean, and would be highly unpopular now if you ask voters. So she can't talk about immigration because I think her true convictions, her values, as she likes to remind us, are for amnesty. She has no interest in dealing with the fact that this many people have illegally crossed our border.
And can I just make one more point, but that actually supports what John is saying about her personal problems, and also what you were saying about Ron Brownstein being kind of wrong about, well, if she's losing the ad war, how can she be winning the candidate war? The ads are her. The two main ads that Trump is running right now quote her directly. One on the trans surgeries for criminal illegal aliens, and the other is her appearance on The View last week saying or 2 weeks ago now, not a thing comes to mind about that Biden. She would do differently from Biden. So that the ad war is her, and that seems to help Trump close the gap in the final days.
I want to sort of broaden this out. I was listening to the 538 podcast. By the way, if you look at the averages, it gets very interesting. The poll averages, which will change over the weekend. So the more Democratic leaning institutions like 538, it's not clear to me whether they've updated with the Times Siena poll yet, but have Harris winning nationally by 2. Real Clear Politics, which of course leans right, has Trump winning by 0.9 or something like that. So there is still some give in what you assign to different pollsters and poll averages, or how you weight them, how you grade them to favor some findings over the others. It's still a jump ball race nationally, but as Nagurny and Engelnick say in this piece, that is not good news for Harris. She needs to actually open a measurable lead up against Trump nationally in order.
Okay, this is officially the prevail. Freudian slip podcast. We've now
done. Thank you. Yes. But the 538 podcast had on a bunch of different pollsters, including a Republican pollster I hadn't heard of, whose name I can't remember at this moment. And the question was, what's the one piece of data that is interesting to you? And this Republican pollster said, Gen Z males. And what he meant was, if you look at these numbers, Gen Z males went for Biden in 2020 by 8 points. And all the polling, if you can actually really believe when you take a subgrouping like this from relatively small polling numbers, show a flip toward Trump. Some of that is attributed by the pollster and others to the fact that Trump is showing gains in Black and Hispanic male voters. I think that we have been talking about the gender gap now for 35 years as a political matter. And the gender gap is always framed as a question of how women feel about the Republican Party. And I think something is changing here that is a much broader matter, which is now the question may be how men feel about the Democratic Party. That the gender gap is relatively constant among women, but is growing in the Republicans' favor among men. Why would that be? Well, I'm going to put it out there and say that 40 years of a popular culture denigrating maleness, masculinity, manhood, the male the sort of the values or the morals that we typically associate or traditionally are associated with men, honor, self-restraint, strength, protectiveness,
Courage.
all of that. What? I'm sorry. Courage have been denigrated, have been downplayed, have been viewed as secondary in importance or value to self-expression, fluidity, empathy, qualities that we would, again, more traditionally associate with women. And that's fine. But if men are now coming to a second generation of feeling as though they are under attack, Trump is kind of a surreally perfect, if extraordinarily vulgar candidate to express this opinion. Because
but it's worse than that. It is worse than that. And that it's not just the denigration of traditional masculinity and the excellent virtues associated with it historically. It is an entire feminization of cultural and political and educational institutions over many decades, which has been embraced as good for women while men were left behind. And now I think you see a lot of men waking up to this and saying, like, why is the entire world like a bad HR department? Everything I do, everything I say is being monitored, is being reported, is being misconstrued. And there's a sort of bureaucratic and ideological component to this that's baked into the system in many, whether it's corporate world, educational institutions in particular. It's very difficult for young men in particular to find their way. And there are all these alternative voices springing up to answer their questions. The Jordan Peterson phenomenon was sort of that's the first time the mainstream noticed it, but it's been going on for years. Yeah. And it's filling a need. There is a void there in our culture that this is filling.
And even more important than that is that in the early going, when the world of this set of ideas that said, you know what, a lot of our culture, or a lot of our popular culture, is misogynistic. It objectifies women. It talks about how great it is to sleep with 16-year-old girls when you're 30, all that kind of thing. And that people my age or people 10 years older, 10 years younger, some of us had to reckon with some of this. Like, you actually had to sort of grapple with the question.
A lot of it was just gross, and people realize that now.
It was gross, right? And and all of that. Okay. If I have a 14-year-old, Christine has 18-year-olds. If you're 22, 23, 24, you were born in the 21st century, you are not part of the culture of misogyny that the popular culture found it necessary to address. You grew up after that. And it feels like they're still coming after you. And it's time to defend yourself or go on offense. And if the culture doesn't allow you room to do this in conventional ways, you will seek out unconventional ways. And disturbingly unconventional ways. The most disturbing probably being the number of young men who are interested in Andrew Tate, a very, very highly problematic figure who is now, like in jail in Romania for maybe being a sex trafficker. But what did Andrew Tate do that got him this young male following? He said, look a woman in the eye, shake her hand, open the door for her. A lot of stuff that Jordan Peterson said as well, or this kind of general, be a man, show yourself to be male. Don't be afraid or apologetic about having the qualities that you possess. And
there's a political dimension too.
Yeah.
It's not just culture, because, the Republican Party has largely been seen throughout recent history as the party of management, the bosses, right? Mitt Romney reminded everyone of their boss. People don't really like their boss, but there are people that other people dislike more than their boss, and that's the Human Resources Department.
Right.
And in the past 4 years in particular, the Human Resources Departments of all American institutions, business, academia, schools, K through 12 schools, have been colonized by the woke and are now DEI propagators. And so that, I think, is the catalyst for what you're seeing, the emergence of this subculture that also has the political dimension, is that people just hate this propaganda that is being fed to them from on high.
If young Black and Latino males are moving toward Trump, the thing that they have in common with this Gen Z phenomenon that this pollster talked about is their maleness. That's the commonality. So the HR departments are full of wokeness about race and minority representation, but it's more narrow than that, because it's also a specific kind of race and minority representation. It's not, I don't know what you would call it. It's not hip hop minority representation.
The DEI ideology demands that men suborn their maleness to their other identity, whether that's their sexual orientation or their race. Those are preeminent. So if you're a man and you're you're a straight white dude or a straight Hispanic dude, and you kind of, you're not perfectly political, if you don't embrace being a Latinx male who is an ally, then you're somehow out beyond the pale. Women, so if you're a conservative woman, this is a long-standing experience. I'm a self-hating woman because I don't agree with Democrats' views of women, and the culture tells me I'm supposed to be liberal. I'm supposed to be, abortion through all 9 months. I'm supposed to be all these things because I'm a woman. That's not my primary identity, though. So if your primary, that's what DEI demands. It says this must be your primary identity. And if you depart from that, then suddenly you become problematic for their ideology.
And then we get into sorry.
I just want to say that just before, just sticking on the male sort of men shaming aspect of this. There was does anyone remember 5 years ago, because this has always stuck with me, Kristen Gillibrand tweeted out, "The future is female and intersectional, and we're just getting started."
Yeah.
And God. I thought at the time...
It went into my threat promise Venn diagram.
Yeah. It's like, first of all, what the hell does that mean? There's no males in the future, but I thought at the time, this is going to bounce back in some bad way at some point. That you cannot go making such declarations so proudly without thinking you are upsetting something very fundamental here.
Can we just just use as an example the second gentleman? Because it is amusing that he has been showcased as kind of the ideal male for Kristen Gillibrand's dystopia. Cuddly, kind,
willingly playing second fiddle all the time.
Second fiddle, yes, right. And then, of course, we have had this story that has only gained traction since it first broke, which is that he once slapped a girlfriend in public. So there's the phoniness of it all, I think, is what really gets people upset. People, and we've been talking about this on this podcast for years now. People see through the lies of identity politics and DEI type. I don't even know what wave it is. Nth wave feminism, and they don't like it.
There is a historic justice or historic irony, or I don't know what you would call it, but if you remember, Trump emerges, the Hollywood Access Hollywood tape emerges, and the Trump's despicable behavior toward women becomes a campaign issue in 2016. And suddenly, as people are reckoning with Trump's bad behavior, articles start appearing by people who said, you know what, back in 1998, I defended Bill Clinton, and I really probably shouldn't have done that because it gave a permission structure to all of this bad behavior. And I did it. I'm ashamed of it now that I look at Trump. I see there were a couple people did this. Then it went, okay. So then the media, particularly in the people of Jodi Kantor and her colleague at the New York Times, start essentially going hunting for Trumps in America. And whom do they come up with as the examples of people who behaved in ways that created the Me Too movement? It wasn't pastors. It wasn't even industrialists who give to Republicans. It was Harvey Weinstein, the head of Miramax. It was Les Moonves, the head of CBS. It was
Matt Lauer.
It was Charlie Rose. It was Joss Whedon, who did Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It was liberal icons whose donations were all woke, whose politics were all woke. And guess what? Maybe when you give money that way and solicit Hillary Clinton that way and have your politics that way, maybe it's all an alibi. Maybe all of that was the cover that they needed to go around and behave really, really, really badly. And what happened politically as a result of that? Al Franken resigned from the Senate because they were hopeful. They were worried that had he not resigned from the Senate, the candidate that they wanted to win an Alabama Senate race would lose that race, Doug Jones, because Roy Moore, the Republican candidate, would have made hay out of the fact that he was being attacked for having supposedly been fooling around with teenage girls, and the Republicans would have said, well, there's Al Franken, there's a picture of him looking like he's groping, which he wasn't, groping a woman on a plane ride, a soldier, an American member of the American military on a plane ride to Iraq. The political consequences of Me Too, cultural consequences of Me Too, all hit the left, not Trump and the right. And something interesting began happening there, which is you guys are all hypocrites. You guys, I'm not listening to you anymore. Like, I don't have to take instruction from you anymore on the moral failings of males. Everybody who is giving me this instruction has been taking money from predators and rapists for 25 years. Harvey Weinstein was one of the leading fundraisers for Hillary Clinton. Like, you guys don't get to set the rules anymore.
But they do. Because,
right.
Well, with younger voters. So one of the things there were two things that struck me. First of all, Bill Clinton is currently leering at Kerry Lake in Arizona. So there has seriously been no consequence for him.
He's been so funny on the trail. I'm sorry to interject,
right?
but
he's actually been,
the comments
he's the id.
from him on
He's
the trail
like,
have been
he's
hilarious.
Someone's id come to life. But the idea that there should be consequences for this behavior, I think, for young voters, I was struck. Someone was quoted. They were going around interviewing all the young influencers at the Democratic convention, and someone mentioned Bill Clinton and made a joke about Monica Lewinsky, and the young people didn't know what that meant. They had no understanding of this scandal. They had no understanding of the hypocrisy that I think you correctly described, John. And so I think there's a part of the Democratic Party, and Kamala is certainly part of this, that assumes that that no longer touches them. But it does. In the Doug Emhoff thing is important. I'm glad Matt brought it up, because the entire mainstream media is ignoring this story deliberately. It has more corroboration and not eyewitness, but
the woman
same-day
herself has
corroboration.
now come out,
and she has come
after
out
2 weeks,
yes.
and told the Daily Mail that it
and
happened.
She said, I am coming out now because this is ridiculous. This is a part of the story. And she specifically said, and I'm glad she put it this way, she said, they are holding him up as a model of masculinity, and that is wrong, because he should not be our model of masculinity, the way he treated me and the way some of his fellow
and
lawyers
he also,
said he did.
Got his nanny pregnant.
Yes.
that has not been commented on or followed up by the mainstream media.
So I just think what you have there is the world of men will be men is more represented by Democratic and liberal captains of industry and culture over the last 7 or 8 years than it is by Republican, by conservatives and Republicans, who admittedly in the 80s and 90s were more likely to be figures like that. Jimmy Swaggart, like the sort of
all the televangelists, yes, basically
the televangelist scandals, and Tammy Faye, whatever, all of that stuff, and the misbehavior of Bob Packwood, others. These were, and of course the accusation, which I think is false, against Clarence Thomas. But all of that was on one side of the ledger. They took Trump and they thought, okay, we can now basically put a stake in the heart of this idea that Republican maleness and strength and all of this is anything but of villainy. We can make the case that this is part and parcel of Republican villainy. And they went out and, like the gender researcher, the gender affirming researcher who got all this money from NIH to study the values and the positive virtues of gender affirming care in the form of puberty blockers, and came back with massive evidence that they were harmful rather than helpful. And then she decided to suppress the evidence. But the New York Times could not, once they got Louis C.K. and Clinton and Weinstein and others, they couldn't. They had the story and they went with it, and that has muddied this circumstance. But I just say again, if the election is going to turn on a gender gap, it is time to reframe the thinking of what the gender gap might be. That it is not women turning on Republicans, it is men turning on Democrats. And this could be a generation-long thing that we are seeing, because these are young guys, right? These are young Black and Hispanic and young men. And early voting, when you vote young and align yourself with a specific party, sometimes those alliances or allegiances are very hard to break.
I would give a shout out to Matt and my colleague Daniel Cox, who has a Substack called American Storylines. He's doing a lot of work on the new gender divide, and really kind of at granular levels looking at what's motivating it, how it breaks out over socioeconomic, educational, all that stuff. And it's a long-term project, as you say, but it's fascinating. It's yielding some fascinating findings.
So 11 days to go till the election. We should caution again that just because we're citing the fact that there appears, there has been obviously movement toward Trump in the last 2 weeks. Democrats are very good at closing. They're very good technically at doing the things that you need to do technically to win elections. There's a lot of talk about how incompetent the Republican get out the vote system is, that they farmed it out to third parties who don't know what they're doing, and the Democrats are really good at doing this, particularly in the battleground states where they got votes in Wisconsin they needed to change the politics of Wisconsin. They got the votes they needed in Pennsylvania to change the political sort of cosmetic political look of Pennsylvania, and they're still there, and those people are still working in those states. So no one who wants Trump to win should get cocky, and nobody who wants Harris to win should sink into despair. But all things being equal, if trend lines don't alter, the trend lines I think are relatively inescapable. And we just don't know what that is going to do to the results on election day. I do believe, though, Mark Halperin said this and others, which is that if Trump wins, we're going to know early. Like that's what's interesting. If Trump wins, the result is going to be available pretty close to midnight on election night. And if Harris wins, it could take days and days and days for the final certification of the results.
Can I just add a little bit of trivia that came through one of the newsletters I read with regard to how people will handle either victory or loss, and that's that here in D.C. a 100,000 person public space permit is being sought for January 20th by groups seeking to protest a potential inauguration of President Trump, former President Trump. So there's going to be a very weird sort of
resistance will return.
Mirror. Yes. So
also, the Republican consultant Brad Todd points out that if you are interested in seeking a therapist or go to a therapist regularly, you might want to book now because if Trump wins, there's going to be a shortage of free appointments.
I have a real question here. I mean, it's just speculative. If Trump wins, will the talking heads reporting it on TV be as destroyed, not as destroyed, or more destroyed than they were in 2016 when they had to report it?
I would say not as. The anchors and kind of the more establishment media figures won't be as destroyed, simply because it should be plain to people, if you just look at the evidence, he can win this election.
Right.
But that doesn't mean there won't be some epic meltdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, MSNBC always accepted question of who's on the panels.
Yeah.
Who talks on panels.
As soon as they call Pennsylvania for Trump, I'm flipping to Nicole Wallace.
Right.
I want to see what happens there.
But part of the 2016 reaction was the shock. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was the reversal.
Correct.
Of the
was
needle.
no one expected it,
exactly.
including Trump.
Okay, so that's a big thing. But I do think that the thing to watch that night and in the weeks that follow, if Trump wins, will be an outbreak of public and open anti-Americanism of a sort that we will not have seen as obviously from the American liberal establishment since the 60s, since the Vietnam race riots, late 60s, early 70s, that the idea will be, okay, the American people had a chance to get rid of Trump. Republicans didn't get rid of Trump, but then the American people had an election and they decided to take him back. And the problem is America. The problem is that we're sick, we're diseased, we're evil, we're foul. You can see little bits and pieces of this in writing as people, but both as people who want Harris to win don't want to depress their audience, so they're still rah-rahing in some fashion or other about how she's a really great candidate and she can still win. But you see it peaking out, and the fact is, in the end, Trump is Trump. He did nothing different. He came at America the same way he always did. Said what he was going to do. Said he was going to kick 15 million people out of the country. Said he was going to be a dictator for a day. Maybe said he likes German generals. Said he's going to put down. He's going to put tariffs on everything. He has not faltered or wavered from his agenda in one iota, and America will be bringing him back, and therefore the disease is America itself.
And it will also have framed the Biden presidency in hindsight in an entirely different way. Biden was supposed to get rid of Trump, not temporarily.
And Obama.
He was supposed to restore. And Obama too.
The
right.
Obama era all of a sudden looks like the Trump era, because consider that Trump emerges in his serious attempt to win the White House not long after the financial crisis and Obama becomes president, because the birther thing began pretty early in like 2010. Yeah, well, 2011 is when Trump went to New Hampshire,
took it up.
and I felt right. So that's Obama's first term. Trump has been part of the American political system, and even though the cognoscenti or the continenti didn't take it seriously until 2015, he was there then. If he does win, all of a sudden the received narrative of the past decade flips on its head in ways that I think are really interesting and worthy of examination.
Nixon was not all that dissimilar. Nixon, and we now look at Nixon, if you are of a historical bent, and say he was a liberal Republican. He created the Environmental Protection Agency. He put wage and price controls on the economy. He did nothing to challenge liberal dominance anywhere, even though he talked about how terrible liberals in the Ivy Leagues were late at night when he was drinking with Haldeman and Ehrlichman. But he did not challenge liberal cultural or even sort of sociological predominance. But he was nonetheless Hitler, and he nonetheless needed to be destroyed. And there were 1,200 domestic bombings in the United States between 1969 and 1972. And there were people living by the hundreds of thousands living on the National Mall and around the tidal basin. And he would go visit them at night and all of that. And that person, Nixon, who may have been a crook or may have been like a bad actor, but was a very serious guy who was not challenging their cultural predominance, nonetheless became the figurehead of an evil regime that was destroying the world.
The reason, of course, is that Nixon oversaw the last stage of a multi-decade war that involved conscription and many American young men sent overseas via the draft to fight in Vietnam. And what's remarkable to me about all the Trump is Hitler talk is Trump, he doesn't want to start any wars. A basic tenet of fascism is territorial aggression, right? And expansion. Yeah. And he doesn't want to do any of that. And it's not Nixon in that sense, because, of course, Nixon escalated Vietnam in order to end Vietnam. Yeah. And when Vietnam ended, those bombings, they went away for the most part, right?
And when conscription ended, the youth movement ended.
Exactly.
2 days after conscription was ended.
We have this strange situation where the Antifa and the people who might take up a violent attitude toward a Trump government, what are they actually protesting? Their protest, it is truly anti-American. There's not even like a casus belli. There's no larger conflict taking place. And I just think that's an important difference between the two, and between Trump and the totalitarians he's being likened to by his opponent.
Right. But it is a temptation on the left, part of the hagiography, that's not the word, the glamorization of the 1960s that is a huge element of the liberal self-understanding in the United States, from the civil rights movement to the anti-Vietnam War movement to the sexual liberationist movement to the women's liberation movement to the gay liberation movement to the changes in American society that make movies that were made in 1960 look as though, compared to movies in 1970, look as though they were made 200 years earlier and they were only made 10 years earlier. Right? I mean, the transformation of American society in an unbelievably short time, all of that is viewed as a golden age by people on college in the left. That is what they want. They missed it. They want it. They want it in their lives. And this could get it for them. So that's the one thing that they have. You're saying this was policy driven by Vietnam or whatever. Maybe so. But whatever it was, the nostalgia for a time of anti-American transformational fervor is a very important undercurrent in the way an enormous number of people in this country feel about the country, and they are poised to jump right back into that kind of self-hatred. We were complaining, or I was complaining in 2015 or 2016, that Trump evoked that stuff from the right. That I was disgusted by his behavior at the Republican convention in 2016, that Obama was right, and that Michelle Obama was right in 2016 to call out Trump's language and talk about America. He just did it the other day. He said, well, it's not really America's fault that we become the garbage can of the world. You can't say it's like he doesn't want it to be the garbage can of the world, but the way that he talked about America, and Obama said, "How dare you talk about America that way," and all of that. So he floated that. I found that noxious, and now, as I say, with a Trump victory, the thing to watch for is that in reverse. I mean, DEI, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, all of that has established the predicate for the argument that we were born in original sin. We're an evil nation dating back to before the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock. And now this has been fulfilled 404 years later or 405 years later by the re-election of Donald Trump. And what the consequences of that will be, I just don't know.
There is some place setting on the Democratic side already about talking. I've seen a few reports where advisors to Kamala Harris say, this country might not be ready to elect a woman, and a Black woman in particular. So there's the place setting for that narrative has already started. And I think we'll definitely see that if she loses.
And also, don't forget the sort of shock troops are all in place here, as in the form of the pro-Hamas protesters, which is also related to how awful and born in original sin America is.
Right. Well, maybe that's the analogy for Vietnam then, for the pro-Hamas movement. That's how they see it, right? Yeah.
Well, so that's our apocalyptic vision of a Trump victory.
Have a great weekend, folks.
Abe, you want to close out with a recommends?
I do. I'm very happy to recommend a book. It's not out yet, but you should pre-order it on Amazon. It comes out sometime in November. It's called The Impossible Man, Roger Penrose and the Cost of Genius. The author is Patchen Bars, Barss. It's a biography of the English mathematician, physicist, Sir Roger Penrose, who's now in his early 90s, I believe. And I think it's the first biography of Penrose. And it's a fascinating look, not just at his life, but and the author had a lot of access to Penrose himself and to a great trove of Penrose's correspondence. And so much of what is fascinating about the book is it really does get into how Penrose thinks. Penrose did breakthrough work on black holes with Stephen Hawking and all sorts of advances on relativity theory. And he's into tiling, which may sound weird, but it's something I was aware that this was one of his lines, but I didn't quite understand why it was what it was. And it has to do with his really sophisticated understanding of geometry. And it's a look into Penrose's mind and his ability to think conceptually in sort of geometric terms involving impossible numbers, and to create sort of impossible figures, impossible objects in his mind and what they mean for the fabric of space-time. And it gets, and a lot of this has to do with the mutual influence that he and the Dutch artist M.C. Escher had on each other. They were sort of the same mind.
I have
and went
a
back and forth. Yeah.
Roger Penrose story, which was when I was an adolescent, middle school age. I became very interested in science and the history of science and scientific discovery. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll be a scientist. And of course, that physics is so interesting. And I want to learn more about physics because maybe I can be a physicist. And so I picked up a Roger Penrose book that he wrote for a popular audience. This is, again, kind of the early 90s. And I read about 10 pages of it. And I said to myself, okay, that phase is done. I'm over that. No physics for me.
Well, he also
So maybe this book will be more accessible.
Oh no, this book is accessible, and he's also
good.
I mean, one of the interesting things about Penrose is that he became through his decades of these breakthroughs an accepted establishment figure in the global physics community. But then he got interested in a bunch of other ideas that are criticized as either a little sloppy all the way to sort of crackpot. He's still interested in the idea that thinking is quantum and that there are microtubules. Well, there are microtubules in the brain that are responsible for these quantum states, and they get into that a little bit toward the end. That's actually an ongoing story. That's still happening in his life, and there are still people working on his claims in there. But he's also a very problematic figure in terms of his personal life, which is very fascinating here. Failed marriages and a very strange, idiosyncratic understanding of a need for a muse to inspire his work. So all told, it's just an absolutely gripping book.
He's also very important. He's important to read, by the way, if you're interested in any of the debates about AI versus human intelligence. He's had ongoing academic battles about it, and is a very interesting interlocutor on that particular debate.
Yeah, one of the foremost people who maintained that the brain does not compute. Thinking is not computation.
Exactly.
Or consciousness is not computation. The book is The Impossible Man by Patchen Bars, Barss.
BARSS. You can pre-order it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever. Give Patchen Bars a bit of a boost here. I feel dumber for having listened to you, not because you made me dumber, but because you reminded me of how illiterate I am in the matters that you were discussing and how shameful that is. And so I'm now going to have to read the book.
Read Cycles of Time. That's a Penrose book. That's the most accessible one, according to my son, who's very into it.
You guys are like so good. You're having this disquisition. Matt's picks up Penrose as a kid. You're citing books by Penrose.
They're just because my son loves
Penrose
physics. That's all.
Globules or whatever it was. You telemodules.
The globules.
I'm sitting here thinking about an episode of The Odd Couple. So that's
hey, it takes all kinds.
That's how we roll here. At the podcast. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back on Monday for Abe, Christine, and Matt. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.